Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of whatever the hell Samson is doing on the podcast. We are fully in draft season for the teams that are not involved in the playoffs, and the Raptors, despite conveying that pick to the San Antonio Spurs, the 8th overall pick, top 6 protected, couldn't hang around, couldn't keep it. I think Eric Kareem tweeted out that the Raptors were close to getting the number 1 pick, that it was either 4 or 14. The ball had to come up, and the incorrect number came up for the Raptors. So we don't have a lottery pick, but still have 19 and 31. Lots of players to consider at each position, and to consider them, actually more than consider when you're talking to me, to teach me and the viewer and listener about the players that he selected. Jack from across the pond, host of the Drop Step podcast. Jack, firstly, how the hell are you doing?
Man, I'm good. I'm good. Those that are viewing really dig down into the draft savant question mark here. That's what I've put as my sort of subtitle. We'll find out because at the moment, sort of the draft to me is like prospecting. It's where the term prospect comes from, right? You're digging
Sure.
for gold. You might have it, or you might just have a pile of dirt at the end of the day. But I'm excited to get into it. And, you've spoken before on this podcast or on Rapcast about the Toronto Raptors were able to build a championship team without having a lottery pick on the roster, or certainly without having a lottery pick within the rotation. Maybe this draft doesn't quite have like championship caliber number 1 players, but every pick is valuable. And I think that they're going to become more and more valuable as players get more skilled, as the CBA comes in. So it's worth digging down into these guys.
Every pick is valuable. And a pick is not necessarily more valuable because of its location in the draft. A
Mhm.
pick can be deemed more valuable because of who is selecting with that pick. And the Raptors, whether it's Norman Powell, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, whoever you want to categorize as like a steal, they did a number later in drafts, and certainly later than 19. We have a bunch of players, well, namely 3, to talk about. Jack is going to walk us through it. Jack, who would you like to start with? Who's the big sexy name at 19?
All right. So my guy, I think, and this is a little bit controversial, he's lowered down on some draft boards of guys that I really respect. Like he's sort of second rounder for a couple of guys that I like Sam Vecini. I think that you've gone on his pod a couple of times to talk Raptors. He's sort of early 20s, sort of around this 19 range, and I've seen him mocked to the Raptors on a couple of mock drafts. I want to bring to you Kel'el Ware here, the Indiana State 7-foot center. He's in his second year, transferred over from Memphis, sort of a high school phenom. And I wrote about Khalil in a mock draft because I took him way too high recently. I
How
took him
high?
for Portland with their, it was pick 14. And I was
Lottery
sort of
talent
faced,
for the Raptors. Let's go.
exactly. I was faced with this dilemma of, do you pick the guy that is ready to come in and contribute the sort of not known quantity, because no one's a known quantity before they get to the NBA, but it was like, am I picking Kyle Filipowski here, or am I picking the guy that I think could be a real swing player? He could go here, he could go here. And I think I wrote, um, I'm picking who could turn out to be the next James Wiseman in hope of finding what we thought James Wiseman was pre-draft, if that makes sense. So that is sort of my elevator pitch for Kel'el Ware. Just a physical marvel, touch from the outside, rim runner, nice little touch from sort of around 15-foot range, maybe a little bit closer in as well. Some of the comps that you might see are sort of like DeAndre Ayton. I get a little bit of Dwight Powell in his rim running. We'll get onto the questions, but this pick represents hope. This pick represents upside, and it represents risk as well, because there are questions around where.
So, for faithful listeners to this podcast, they would have heard me express optimism about James Wiseman, not as the big swing in free agency or something like that, and maybe not necessarily for the Raptors, but if you're looking around, like it's 8 million a year, anywhere from like biannual exception to lower end of the MLE. I think James Wiseman, whether it's the Raptors or the Heat or some other team, a guy who defends the rim well, finishes at a high level, and rebounds and runs out in transition, that's a really strong starting point. And as much as people want James Wiseman, that to be the starting point that he's already built out from, like I get it. Bigs take a little longer time sometimes. So a lot of people probably, if you said like James Wiseman is the upside of Khalil, they might be put off from it. But it's basically
Mhm.
saying like, as much as James guffs up a lot of things on the court, he does some things well that are really hard to do. And I suspect that's kind of something that we see with Khalil as well. Your point of just listing out his stats, his accolades, 16 points per, 10 rebounds, 1.5 assists, 58% from the field, 42% from three. That jumped up from lower than 30%, and it's on
Yeah.
fairly low volume, and 63% from the line on a lot of free throws. This guy gets fouled a lot. He's a sophomore out of Indiana, as you said. What? Just let's talk about fitting into the Raptors then. Jakob Pertl, Kelly
Mhm.
Olynyk, whoever the hell else you want to have playing in the front court. How do you find Khalil fits with these Raptors?
So when I first invited you onto the drop step, I had a question prepared of can Scotty be peak Scotty next to Jakob Pertl because he's sort of this ground bound, lumbering, heavy screen setting, great touch around the rim, but he's not exactly going to jump above the square to throw down an
Mm-hmm.
alley oop that Scotty's throwing, right? Or he's not going to space out to three, that elusive. It's kind of just Miles Turner and Brook Lopez, unless you're looking at a superstar center at the moment. But that rim protector that can space to three, I think that dependent on what Khalil ends up being, the hope would be is that he is a little bit more of that sort of Miles Turner archetype because what we've seen so far in college is an ability to sort of protect the rim at a pretty high level when he's in position. He's quite light on his feet. He's one of those guys that doesn't even necessarily have to jump to get blocks because he's got this insane wingspan. He measured in at 7 foot 4.5 wingspan at the combine the other day. So I think defensively, you're looking at someone that is slightly mobile for their size. Again, just tested insanely at the combine. It jumps out on film as well. He's happy to play and drop, sort of get back, potentially hedge at times as well. But the fit that really excites me is on the offensive end, where I think you're just looking to provide your ball handlers with as much optionality as possible. And someone that is nearly 7 foot without shoes, that weighs 230 pounds, you hope can be sort of coached into being a really good screen setter. Ware has not had like great guards to play with during his time at college. So ideally, he can be that rim runner where he's going all the way to the hoop and, quickly finds him with a little sort of wraparound pass or a dump off, or, someone's throwing an alley oop and he can sort of fulfill this Nick Claxton role that we maybe spoke about on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other option is he's catching it on the short roll, and he's had to do a lot of work from floater range this year. He shot 58% from the field. I think you said at the top
Yep.
of the intro to Kel'el Ware. But a lot of that is sort of your Isaiah Hartenstein range, 8 to 10 footer. Yeah, 8 to 10 footer, I suppose, one handed because the lane just gets so clogged with the lack of sort of offensive talent in Indiana State. So then you have a guy that can operate in a short roll as well. And you spoke about it, low volume, but 42% from three this year. I think the shot looks quite good. I'm not claiming to be a sort of shot doctor, shot evaluator at any point, but he's happy to go to it. He's confident going to it, and he's been going to it in games. Whereas if you look at guys like Donovan Clingan or Zach Edey, they've shown some touch during sort of the scrimmages or the combine or the shooting drills this week, but they weren't being asked to do it at the college level. Ware has been asked to do it, and I've spoken about this a ton on my podcast. How the hell do you project how a big is going to shoot?
Mm-hmm.
Because the guys that space at the moment, aside from Miles Turner, Brook Lopez didn't take a three for like the first 7 years of his career. They sort of emerge a little bit later on. So I think that there's the willingness to take the three and a little bit of touch there as well. You see the touch from floater range, you see the touch from three. I think the high end outcome is a guy that just provides Raptors ball handlers with a ton of options when he's on the court.
So what I'm wondering about, maybe more than anything,
Mhm.
is how the Raptors use their bigs. When we talk about
Right.
Kelly Olynyk or we talk about Jakob Pertl, you're being a hub to
Mhm.
facilitate kind of Darko ball. And just to your point, I had to look this up quickly. one of the best 3-point shooters of all time from the big man position. His name is Karl Anthony Towns. He
Yeah.
took
Yep.
0.2 3-point attempts per game at 25% at Kentucky. Just as a mention, nobody knows how the hell a big is going to shoot. Like bigs aren't shooters until they're overwhelmingly shooters. It like
Mhm.
the NBA requires big men to prove it over a really long period of time. And a lot of
Yeah.
bigs they have a tough time getting that volume out of themselves. And even of the selection of guys who get that volume, a lot of them don't meet the efficiency. Like if you plan out for like 16 bigs and you're like, these guys are gonna shoot, it's gonna be like two. Like two of those guys are gonna shoot. That's such a salient point you make. But to the other point, playmaking that, and this is the problem with what I said about James Wiseman coming to the Raptors that might gum some things up, is like you don't just get to really be run and dunk. You don't get to
Mhm.
be that type of guy on the Raptors. You have to be a hub. You have to be able to dribble across the top to connect DHOs in the offense. You have to be able to make passes at a split action. Khalil, what's the situation there?
So again, I'm going to come back to sort of the lack of offensive talent round Khalil this season. I'll be honest,
Mm-hmm.
I haven't watched a ton of his Memphis tape. He actually disappointed there. He was projected to be a first round pick in 2023 when he was coming out of high school. I think he was a 5-star rated recruit. I reached out to your friend Josh Cordonera for the first time the other day
The
just to ask
best.
his opinion on Khalil. And he said, yeah, super high in high school, dig into sort of the micro skills. So we're in the process of digging. But what I'd say is his shot profile when he's not rolling to the rim or when he's not catching the ball, when he's not operating, with a guard essentially, is quite similar to DeAndre Ayton's. He's one of these 7-foot guys that feels himself a little bit more as yeah, I've got this shooting stroke. I want to show
Mm-hmm.
you that I've got it, and I've been so good at the high school level that I'm going to carry that through to college and I'm
Sure.
going to sort of prove that I'm the best player on the court. So a lot of the time he is catching at the elbows. He is sort of
I,
operating from
I
the
call
free
that
throw line.
forward-itis, I think is the term
Yes.
yes, yeah.
I call that growing up watching Kevin Durant.
Yeah.
And it's just like, we're all going to try it.
Yeah.
Maybe it gets coached out of us, but we're all going to try it.
Yeah.
So I wonder if like there are definitely points where we've seen him operate in handoff action. I'm not going to say that there's a ton of it on tape because I don't think that Indiana has consistently run with it, and I don't think that his screen setting is sort of a massive strength of his game at the moment. I think a lot of the time, young bigs coming into the league, that's one of the real sort of separating factors between your 8 to 10 year vets and these guys that look like athletic marvels and they have the bodies, but they've just got to learn the timings. They've just got to
Mm-hmm.
learn the sort of screen craft, if you will, I suppose. So I think there's the familiarity with that space on the court. He has made sporadic reads. I'm not calling him Nikola Jokic. I'm not calling
Mm-hmm.
him even like Jarrett Allen has been phenomenal from the elbows this year. I think that he's really sort of stepped his game up. But I think there's maybe flashes of it there. But when I picked Khalil in a mock draft that I did a couple of weeks ago, I picked him with the understanding that he's probably going to spend a little bit of time in the G League for his debut season. I'd like him to get sort of used to playing next to grown men. I'd like him to get some decent guard play on a G League team. And he's not going to be a winning player in his first year. You're picking him for the upside, you're picking him for the tools. You have to be willing to go, well, we're going to sacrifice winning this year in order to develop a guy that long term we think could maybe be our starting five.
Okay. Is there anything you talked about the short roll, the shot making out of it? Do you see anything in the way of like kind of porting that we found some reads out of the short roll? You think that type of playmaking can contribute elsewhere? It's just different spots on the floor, but he makes the reads. Is there anything there?
I think more so, I was quite impressed with how when he caught an offensive rebound, he was happy to look back out
Mm,
to the perimeter instead of sort of forcing another shot up with a guy on his back. Some people would call that passivity, and if you're comparing him to DeAndre Ayton, then that word is going to keep coming up and up and up. But I do think that there are flashes of passing there. He isn't your like your 2K build where they've
sure.
spent all of their skill points and they've just gone right 25 passing accuracy. We're leaving it there. I'm a play finisher. That's it. But he's clay.
Yeah.
You pick Kel'el Ware because you back your development team, you back your sort of development history to mold him into what you want to be. I spoke about him at sort of like the top of this section saying he can do this, 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 and this. How often do guys end up actually doing all of the things that I mentioned at the top of that, at the top of that spot? It's sort of Kristaps Porzingis. I think Jokic does it, although he doesn't sort of sky for alley oops. Embiid maybe has the potential to do it. I'm mentioning some really, really good names here.
Yep.
So it's down to the Raptors to look, to evaluate, and to go, this is the player he is. This is the player we want him to be. We think we can get him there.
A willingness to scan the floor goes a long way. So that sounds positive even from there. Any
Mhm.
final thoughts on Khalil before we move on to some of the higher volume boys from this draft?
Yeah, for those of you listening and imagining a 7 foot athletic freak that shot 42% from three and has been a decent rim protector in his second season in college and thinking, why the hell isn't this guy in conversations for number one? The concerns have been, particularly in his season at Memphis, and less so this year, but I've heard other analysts bring it up. There are questions about his motor. There are questions about his effort. I think that he didn't play for a good team last year in Indiana State, or in Indiana rather. And at points there were not necessarily like instances of him checking out, but maybe the concentration lapsing a little bit, or maybe like, why isn't he bringing his A game to every single game? Why is he having games where he's quiet or where he's not being a presence on the board? So it's another one where the skill set is there. He's been this elite prospect through the high school sort of system, through AAU ball, but can we infuse him with that sort of competitive nature, and can we get him to really upskill this archetype that we're seeing? Can we actually get him to an NBA level at this archetype instead of a college level?
Yeah. You mentioned DeAndre Ayton, but another, like the scary story for maybe this type of guy or this archetype is like Christian Wood. You're looking at all
Yeah.
the talent in the world, but the NBA, we see unique bodies, we see unique skill types, we see unique players dominate because of how they input their skill. And some guys have everything, but they're not sure how to input it at NBA speed. They don't make
Mhm.
the right read, 6 times out of 8. They make it 2 times out of 9, like that kind of stuff. It shows up. Interesting to think about. I suggest everyone go poke around on some film. Bub Carrington, freshman out
Yeah.
of Pitt, 14 points per game, 5 boards, 4 assists, 41% from the field, 32% from three,
Mhm.
78% from the free throw line. Huge 3-point attempt rate, healthy free throw rate, and a good assist rate. The thing here that I'll mention for people, because it will be notable throughout the podcast, the highest correlation they found from being a good 3-point shooter or becoming a good 3-point shooter at the NBA level is not 3-point percentage, it
Mhm.
is 3-point volume. Does your coach trust you to take them? Are you comfortable taking a wide variety of threes? So 32%, it might scare you away, but volume is a decent thing to bet on. Bub Carrington, Jack, walk me through the hunger.
Uh, okay, let's do it this way. Samson, if the Raptors could bring in any guard in free agency this year that's currently available, just quick, one name answer, who would you want them to bring in?
Well, you know who it is. It's
I do.
Malik
Just
Monk.
just say it for me. Yeah, Malik Monk. He is not Malik Monk, but there is this idea of the Raptors requiring a second ball handler that can either sort of carry the load when quickly sits, or maybe ease the load on Emmanuel quickly. The game that we did earlier in the season, that Portland Toronto game, where it was like, oh my God, the resilience quickly is showing because he is just having to get through usage. I think that there'd be real value in selecting a guy like Bub Carrington, because what I've seen on the tape is a really, really confident 3-point shooter. Like you mentioned, the 3-point attempt rate was, sort of sky high, especially for one of the youngest players in the draft. Come draft night, he'll still be 18. I think he'll be 18 for another month after that. So this was a freshman coming into the coming into college. He'll be one of the youngest players selected on draft night. Um, just plays with such a, like, you wouldn't look and think he's 18. I think is the first thing I'm going to say. He had real We spoke about Screencraft with Kel'el Ware. He was really, really happy operating out a pick and roll. He was happy sort of snaking the pick and roll, getting into his floater range. 51% on non-rim twos this season. So he's got that sort of touch. 6'4" without shoes. That was the combine measurement, or 6'3.75. 6'8" wingspan, nearly weighing in at 200 pounds. Just has that ability to sort of get to his spots in the mid range, around the elbows, and rise up above the guy that's guarding him. And then from 3-point range as well, you're looking at someone that is really happy to get to his shot off the dribble, that was happy to relocate, almost sort of that sort of Warriors play where a guy will give the ball up and then run towards the guy that he's just passed it to in order to sort of force the screen to be initiated. Really happy to pull up from three there as well. Happy on either side of the court as well. I know that you've spoken in the past about sort of the balance that RJ Barrett has brought to the Toronto Raptors, having a left-handed guy, a guy that likes to drive from the right side of the floor, or left side of the floor rather. I look at Bub and I see someone that could come in and be complementary to start with, but someone that offers you real upside, being the kind of frame that the Raptors like, the kind of age
Yeah.
that everyone likes come draft time, and having the sort of wisdom beyond his years already exhibited in his first season.
As you mentioned, get actions are becoming more and more popular in the NBA rather than strictly pick and roll stuff, just because, teams love the continuation you get out of it, being able to
Mhm.
draw keepers out of there. As you mentioned, because of the weight and the frame, he might be a little bit shorter than Emmanuel, but he's functionally that's a bigger player, and that'll show up on an NBA floor. I'm almost certain of it. As far as like getting to the floater range, how good is he getting all the way to the rim? What have you noticed as far as like driving there?
I, I was worried that you were going to ask this, because this has obviously been the concern with Quickly. So the feedback on Carrington is, maybe it's because he's, this is such a, I sound like a used car salesman here trying to sell you a draft pick. Maybe it's because he's so talented that he is just sort of happy to pull up and shoot over his guy from sort of 15 feet, 10 feet. He has not been fantastic at getting to the rim. He has picked up his dribble fairly consistently as he's sort of driven to the rim, played off 2 feet, which is a concern that we've also had with Emmanuel Quickly. But there have been times where he's got there. I think that the the sort of evaluation that I heard is Bub Carrington will take whatever the defense gives you, and for an 18-year-old, that implies that you're reading the
Sure.
floor, you're reading the game, you're making smart decisions. But if a team is trying to take away the rim, he has not been the kind of player to say, "My team needs rim pressure tonight. I'm going to get all the way there." He's more than happy to settle because he's very good at it.
Where do you find that he's making most where do you find that most of his playmaking comes from? Some guys do it above the break, some guys do it from the middle of the floor, some guys do it from the baseline. Where do you see it most often comes for Bub?
Traditional above the break pick and roll action when he's operating with a screen in five, basically. I think that he is a really high level pick and roll player for an 18-year-old. Like I said, really happy to sort of snake the dribble, great cadence to his pick and roll as well. Really doesn't rush, but I think because he knows that he can get to that pull up sort of whenever he wants. Again, I'm speaking about him like he's KD. He's obviously like 6'4". This is without shoes, by the way. But if you watch the tape, he he uses all of that wingspan. He gets really good elevation on his jumper as well. He's not one of these guys that sort of like shoots from a standing form. He's happy to sort of rise up and almost wait for his guy to fall back down before he releases his shot as well. So I think a lot of the playmaking, it's sort of versatile reads in terms of he's finding his big, he's finding shooters, he's finding cutters, but it's usually been in traditional pick and roll action.
Interesting. And so if a high pick and roll is his best thing,
Mhm.
that's not a ton of second side action. If we're talking about him being a guy who steps in next to, Emmanuel or Scotty or RJ as a creator, is
Yep.
there any two-man actions on the side of the floor that you think like, oh, that's nice, that's good to see from him? Do you find that he's proactive as a cutter? Do you see like good catch and go stuff? Is there anything as a secondary player that pops to you?
So the relocation popped to me in a similar way to how it might have with Grady when he was on the ball last year at Kansas. I'm not saying he's that level of off-ball mover, because Grady is one of the best off-ball movers to certainly come out of the 2023 class, and he would have been 2024 as well. But he's played with really good play finishers at Pitt this season, and he's played in a tough conference where he's actually got reps against decent decent defenders, decent drop bigs, etc. I don't think he played with another ball handler to the point where when he was on the floor, the coach necessarily would have been comfortable with saying, "Oh, we know we've got this really talented guy, but let's have him spot up on the second side for now while someone else tries to create out of another action." I think one of the reasons that I saw so much sort of traditional pick and roll play is because that was their best sort of modus
Hmm.
operandi of creating buckets, basically. But I I'm selecting him here hypothetically because of the upside, because of the off the dribble 3-point shooting, because of the feel for the game. And I don't know, this is sort of like a more interesting general conversation. When you see a guy handle pick and roll reps really well, when you see him operate out of pick and roll at a high level, if that was a young player, would you think that that ability sort of ports to other actions? Or do you think NBA players sort of learn, here are the reads, here's my lines of vision, here's the passes that are available, and it can actually be quite a shock to the system to then go and have to attack a closeout or operate on the weak side?
I think it's actually, I don't mean this in a bad way, but if you get a ton of pick and roll reps and you're good at
Mhm.
it, you kind of start, and that's what teams offer you. You kind of start to play at your own pace. And it can be difficult to start playing at someone else's pace or the
Right.
pace that an advantage created requires from you. Because a pick and roll, you start it how you want it, you go at the pace that you deem is best for your own success because you're starting from a flat position against a set defense. It's a different ask to start attacking tilted defenses and do it in the right way and like do it quickly, read the
Mhm.
top foot, get middle, make a read when the defense is rotating differently than what you're used to. I don't think that like it's good that guys can make reads, but I don't think it ports very easily because there's a reason Dean Wade, who is not better than a lot of players in the NBA, but is certainly better at like reading a tilted defense and then getting to a dangerous spot that he could never get to against a static defense.
Sure.
Not everyone can do that kind of stuff, and it's better to be able to break down a static defense than it is to break down a tilted one, but not
Mhm.
that much better because only you only get one or two guys who are going to be breaking down the defense repeatedly, and how else do you fit on the floor, especially if you're a ball handler? So I don't know if it'll translate directly. I'll have to watch more of the film myself, but it's a really interesting question. The thing I want to ask you about more than anything really
Yeah.
is defense.
Mhm.
How's Bub on that end?
Bub is a okay. So Bub, despite weighing nearly 200 pounds and having this frame, is weak, sort of through the chest. He's been bullied quite frequently this season, but he is alive and he is awake on defense to the point where he might get beat the first time, but he'll stay engaged with the play and he'll try and contest. He's he's very spatially aware, and he's not one of these.
You got to use the term, the one that everyone makes fun of,
What do you want?
proprioception. You
Proprioception.
got
There you go. There you go. The proprioception is off the charts. 99 proprioception. It's
yes.
incredible. We've never seen proprioception like it. Um, he's actually had to be a good defender through his high school career because he was a little bit of a late bloomer. He arrived at Pitt this year, and I forget the name of the coach, but I was reading a story earlier today in prep for this. Coach said, "I thought he was going to be an NBA player when we were recruiting him. He very quickly in our preseason process revealed that he was something completely different to what we thought. He was far better than what we thought. We knew he was going to be drafted this year." So they actually set up sort of a tailored plan where they asked around the league and they asked sort of scouts at the college level and at NBA level, what do you like about Bub's game? What don't you like about Bub's game? So one of the things that I like about these guys that haven't necessarily, it's interesting because he hasn't necessarily had the ball in his hands through the entirety of high school, or he hasn't been one of your traditional 5-star top 10 in the class recruits. I think that that's been good for him on the defensive end because he fights. He's sort of like decent at positioning his body. He didn't give up when he had to sort of navigate around screens at all. And he was able to use his length both on the glass and in shot contests as well. Really sort of happy to stick with the play. I'm not saying that Bub Carrington arrives into the NBA and he's a good defender off the jump. Much like Kel'el Ware, I think if you pick Bub, you're accepting that if you're going to give him NBA minutes this year, you're probably going to lose those minutes. But
That's usually the case for rookies.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. But when you're selecting an 18-year-old rookie and an 18-year-old at draft time, I think it's especially going to be the case because there are clear areas where you can poke at him. But I think the Raptors probably want to be a championship team in about 4 to 5 years' time, right? When Scotty is hitting his prime, when Emmanuel is still in his late 20s, etc. Grady is really sort of coming into it. So I tried to approach this exercise looking for guys and trying to project what they'd be long term, and that's really really difficult to do. And I may well have got that wrong. In fact, I had a guy called Mike Gribinov on my podcast. He was a great draft guy, been around in the space for a really long time, and he spoke about how he just tries to project NBA quality. He does not speak about role. He just says, I think this guy is an NBA player. I'm not willing to tell you if he's Dennis Smith Jr. pre-draft or if he's Dennis Smith Jr. now, because we don't know that. It's hard to be that accurate. But I think that, again, much like Kel'el Ware, the clay is there of the player that you want to mold. And then you've also got this feel for the game and this pull-up three-point shooting that I really, really like.
There's, you talk about pick and roll craft, you talk about expecting certain things to come along or hoping for certain things to come along, and losing minutes as a rookie. Grady
Mm-hmm.
lost so many minutes as a rookie. His body not prepared for the NBA. But
Mm-hmm.
I just finished watching and tracking all of Grady's jumpers. His movement jumpers, the percentage he shot on decent volume, I won't divulge any of it yet. It's coming in a piece. Staggering. Like,
Right.
the Raptors may have found in the draft one of the best movement shooters in the NBA going forward. A lot of stuff didn't translate perfectly, but a really hard thing to hit on, it seems like they did. Stay tuned for that, everybody, coming forward. But moving from one of the younger players in the draft to one of the oldest, big numbers from Terrence Shannon Jr. He's a 5-year senior, caught up in the COVID of it all. He'll be 24 before the season starts. He's out of Illinois, 23
Mm-hmm.
points per game, 4 boards, 2 assists, 47% from the field, 36% from three on insane volume, 80% from the free throw line. Again, insane free throw volume. At a 60% free throw rate. This is basically like Jimmy Butler jackassery in Miami type of free throw rate. Terrence Shannon Jr., 24 years old. What is the sell, Jack?
Are you going to miss Gary Trent Jr. if he leaves in free agency this year?
I like Gary the person. The team
Yeah.
really likes Gary the person.
Mhm.
As far as like NBA players go, very low ego, very amenable. Uh, I, it wouldn't disappoint me at all. I'd be quite happy if they came together on a good signing, but the money could easily go away where Gary leaves, and I don't think it would be that bad for the Raptors.
The sell is that Terrence Shannon Jr. can come in and be your Gary Trent Jr. replacement. I think that they profile incredibly similarly in terms of
Mm,
that high level scorer that has not flashed playmaking through his 5 years in college. By God, if they tried at Texas Tech and Illinois, he's not flashed that playmaking feel. He's sort of happy to sort of zip the ball along the perimeter, make the extra pass, but this is not a guy with pick and roll craft. This is someone that creates for themselves at a high level from all three levels of the floor. The thing about Terrence Shannon Jr., quick disclaimer, he had legal trouble earlier this year. He was dealing with a court case where he was up against some serious sort of allegations. I believe that those have all been settled now, but if you Google, I'm not about to get into like the suit
sure.
style. This is all the controversy around Terrence Shannon Jr., but he's at the combine, he's on mock drafts and everything. It looks like the coast is sort of clear at the moment. Um, he's just developed into a really high level player and he's gotten better every single year and was probably one of the three best players in his conference this season, in a conference that included Zach Edey as well. I've seen serious arguments online. No, real hoopers know that Terrence Shannon Jr. is the best player in the ACC. But this is a guy that has seriously developed his game over the course of his 5 years in college. I think he's probably NBA ready. And while I've brought to you, sort of behind door 1 and 2 are two players that are not necessarily NBA ready, but potentially have really high ceilings. If the Raptors are trying to be good this year, I think that Terrence Shannon Jr. can come in and be a cost effective option that can come into the NBA, play, and be offensively and defensively viable in 2024.
Okay. So, for anybody who wants to know, by the way, I just like Googled around. So, Terrence Shannon Jr., it is of the sexual assault variety he was
Mm-hmm.
accused of. So, a quick thing on Terrence. So, basically, the school dropped its investigation in April. A Kansas judge decided that there's sufficient probable cause for Shannon to stand trial. Shannon entered a plea of not guilty, and he's doing the draft process and everything. His quote, obviously, it's a real serious accusation, and I'm aware of that, and I can't go much into detail about it, and I'm just focused on what I can control, and that's basketball and what I do on the court in the weight room with my family. Okay, and so that'll all be forthcoming. Nothing's happened yet. And another quote from him is, I feel like people are going to have their opinion of me no matter what you're going through, or if you're not going through anything. You can't let other people's opinions affect you. So there will be a day in court. That has not happened yet. Terrence Shannon Jr. Defensively, what have you made of him there?
In terms of like his defensive ability, I think that he's not going to be an all league defender, but when you combine his frame with his wingspan, with his weight, I've got those figures for you here. So he's 6'6" without shoes, 220 pounds, 6'9" wingspan, decent vertical leap as well. Plays really hard on the defensive end, consistently sort of chasing blocks and stocks, not necessarily in too aggressive a way. He I think would be able to come into the NBA and having seen 5 years of college action, having been tasked with having a really high offensive load, which he presumably would not carry into an NBA system. I think that he's shown the ability to stay with smaller guys on the perimeter. He's shown the ability to handle himself to a decent degree on mismatches where he's up against guys that potentially have the weight advantage or the height advantage, but he's not going to be, this year's Herb Jones, this year's Jalen Suggs. I think he's a decent defender and someone that wouldn't necessarily let your scheme down on that end.
So the last thing we'll say before we get into the second rounds, or actually this will be two podcasts. So before Jack and I come back to you in a day,
Mhm.
the last thing on Terrence Shannon Jr., I suppose, is that in the NBA, we've seen teams are extremely willing, basically all 30 teams, if somebody is acquitted, they are not worried about allegations. That's 30 teams. The number drops once, people are convicted of
Mm.
things. And I can't say I'd expect the same, like, and this is the thing with fandom. You can try and cheer for teams that don't participate in this manner, but NBA teams probably don't let the on court value get in. Well, they don't let the off court like controversy get in the way of the on court value very often. And what happens in Terrence's trial, I suspect, will have a significant bearing on his future in the league. As if anybody's convicted of anything, it typically does. But yeah, um, just want to talk about it responsibly, Jack and I both. So we'll keep that there, Jack. Anything you want to say to the people before they tune in tomorrow to hear our second round picks?
Yeah, absolutely. If we're doing two podcasts, pick 19, the three guys that we've ordered. Like I said, I'm a bigger Kel'el Ware guy. I'm coming round to Bub Carrington rather. Terrence Shannon Jr. is just a different sort of option that we could go to. I didn't want to bring
Mm-hmm.
you three guys that are going to see G League time, that are going to take a little while to have a real sort of positive on court impact. But they're definitely guys that you should check out. I think that people have had really varying reads on what Kel'el Ware is as a player. Some people have him as high as sort of like top 10, some people have him in mid second round. Bub is this draft riser who is continuing to rise. I've seen links to the Heat in recent days with pick 15, although they seem like a Devin Carter team. I'm sure that Esfandiar Berahani is going to come on this podcast at some point and talk about Devin Carter because that guy loves Devin Carter. Um, and then Terrence Shannon Jr. It was just sort of a logical thought about free agency. If Gary Trent Jr. is going to go, I think that he's a player that profiles really similarly, that has become one of the best players in college basketball, that has consistently worked in his game and that works hard. So I go Kel'el Ware 1, Bub Carrington 2, Terrence Shannon Jr. 3. We'll see you for tomorrow for second round picks.
Much to consider. Okay, everybody. See you tomorrow.